What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the latest episode of WWE Untold entitled Rodzilla Runs Wild, focusing on Dennis Rodman and Karl Malone's stint in WCW in the late 90s. I thought this was solely going to focus on Dennis Rodman. I did not know they were going to cover the Karl Malone stuff as well, which I'm glad they did. Obviously, I guess I probably should have figured that because they go hand in hand, and a lot of Dennis Rodman's stint in WCW had to do with Karl Malone in that big tag team match at Bash at the Beach in 1998 with Hogan and DDP. I thought this was really cool, and, well, a few things. First of all, I'm glad they waited to do this, because Hogan has now been back with the company since they kind of exiled him a few years ago, about 5 years ago now. They brought him back in early 2019, so they must have recorded this in the last 6 months or so. I was very happy they had DDP on this special too. So for those wondering, yes, he's been involved with AEW for the past 6 months to a year now. I don't know when his first appearance was. I know he was at All In late 2018, but he was on this special, and I have to imagine this was not filmed 2 years ago. Dennis Rodman is a part of it. I do not know why Karl Malone. I mean, maybe I'm sure he was contacted for it. I'm not sure what he's up to nowadays. I don't know why he wasn't. I don't think he's passed away or anything, so I'm not really sure why he wasn't a part of this. But Dennis Rodman was, which was cool. DDP plays a very big part of it, as he should, just because he was kind of responsible for bringing in Karl Malone to combat Dennis Rodman in that tag team match back in the summer of 1998. But it's not really all that often they discuss WCW with this type of thing. I know we had the Monday Night War show and everything else, but when it comes to celebrity involvement and other stuff they've done in regards to, that didn't have to do with their demise in the early 2000s and 2001. They don't really talk about this stuff all too much. They talk about it in the Death of WCW book, which is a great read, by the way. If you haven't already read it, definitely do so, especially now if you're quarantined or whatnot. That's a great book, and they talk about it there. But they don't really talk too much about this type of stuff, especially on Untold. And on Untold, we've had stories of Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero, which they talked a bit about their WCW run together back in the 90s. They've covered Sting's run in WWE, the debut, and how he retired, and a lot of other things, but not really WCW so much. So I thought this was really, really good. It also was one of the longer episodes at around 28 minutes. Usually they're around like 15 minutes to 20 minutes. This is one of the longer ones, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of ground to cover here. So they talk about how WCW went to celebrity matches to kind of combat WWE, because it was an interesting thing to take people out of their element in acting or entertainment or sports and put them into WWE, or not just WWE, but pro wrestling, to see how they would do. People like Jay Leno, Muhammad Ali to a lesser extent back in the 80s with the first WrestleMania, Mike Tyson, which also came in 98. But Dennis Rodman, I believe, first came into WCW in 97. I mean, WWE was obviously no stranger to bringing in celebrities for their big shows. So WCW, they were trying to do something different, even though it kind of felt similar, because WWE was already doing that by that point. Either way, Hulk Hogan thought it was special, again, to kind of take people out of their element in sports and entertainment and then bring them into sports entertainment. Bischoff thought it was a great idea to give wrestling that extra credibility and media coverage. He's kind of thinking about it from a kind of a promoter perspective as well. From that kind of standpoint. And Bischoff brings up that, this isn't really anything new. This has been something that's been going on in wrestling since the 80s with Muhammad Ali, and even probably well before that as well. So around this time, Karl Malone, the Mailman, and Dennis Rodman were playing on the Bulls and the Jazz, respectively. Dennis Rodman was one of the most popular and controversial sports stars in the world at that point in the late 1990s, with like the colorful hair and how he would dress. He would dress in drag just to make people boo him. That's just what he did. Not boo him, but like just to make people mad, just to get people talking. He even said if social media was around today when we hear from Dennis Rodman on the special, he would be a billionaire, because the guy always had attention, he always had media, publicity, and stuff like that. He was always making the news for one thing or another. Not really doing anything bad, per se, but always making himself, maintaining relevancy, getting people to talk about him. He was the king of that back in the 90s. And WCW really wanted to capitalize on his star power at that point back in 1997. So they brought him in, had him join the NWO on Nitro, which again is a perfect fit. NWO, despite being cool heels, they were supposed to be the top heel faction on WCW. So bringing in Dennis Rodman, who already had a ton of heat, to use a wrestling term here, to borrow a wrestling term, was perfect. It was the perfect fit for the NWO. Dennis Rodman, one of the things that he wanted when he came into WCW, he told Bischoff, for the powers that be, he wanted a tour bus. They're like, okay, we'll get you a tour bus. Another thing that he wanted to do while riding on said tour bus was stop at a gentleman's club, aka a strip club, on the way back from one of their shows or something. And obviously, Bischoff says gentleman's club, but we all know what he's talking about here. So they all go in, not just Rodman, not just Bischoff, but like a whole bunch of the crew, probably a bunch of NWO guys and some other people as well. They're all at the quote-unquote gentleman's club, and Dennis Rodman, no one knows where he is. He just disappears, and Bischoff's like, where is Rodman? And someone says, he's back on the tour bus. So he goes back over to the tour bus, and he's advised by people outside of the tour bus, do you really want to go in there? And Bischoff's like, why wouldn't I? So he gets on the tour bus, and he's like, holy shit, now I understand why people were advising me against getting on the tour bus. He said it was like a scene out of Caligula. Caligula? I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's what he says. Dennis Rodman talks about how he had a reputation for partying, and he knew the boys liked to party too. So again, it was the perfect fit. He talked a lot about how he used to watch wrestling back in the day growing up, and he kind of grew up on the 80s wrestling and Hulk Hogan and stuff like that. And he always wanted to do it. Dennis Rodman, like I said earlier, they talked about how he would dress in drag and color his hair and stuff like that just to make people mad, and he succeeded at it. Everybody, including the wrestlers, the fans, the wrestlers themselves, all hated the idea of him coming in, and it worked because they all wanted to see him get his ass kicked, which he later did at the hands of Karl Malone in that tag team match that we'll get to momentarily. So going and speaking of Karl Malone, DDP, we hear from him, and he talks about, I guess, meeting Karl Malone either at a basketball game or somewhere. I forgot where he said it was. But and Malone did the diamond cutter. He's like, holy shit, like this guy watches wrestling. He knows who I am. So he did the diamond cutter, and he's like, holy shit, like, all right, here's my number, dude. If you ever want to get involved, then, give me a call. So he feels he's kind of responsible for getting him in the ring, which he absolutely was. And Bischoff gives him credit for that, too, for kind of making this whole thing happen. Without DDP, who knows if that match would have ever happened? That tag team match with Hogan and Rodman versus Malone and DDP. So anyway, they talk about how Malone had a very solid build, much more than Rodman. Rodman was very, over the top, had a great presence about him. Malone didn't really have that same presence in terms of, like, I don't want to say promo skills, the guy isn't a wrestler, but, like, what he kind of lacked in personality, he more than made up for in his build and physique. The guy was way more solid. He was like 250 pounds. Rodman was maybe 220, if that. Way more lanky. Malone was built to be a professional wrestler. He was like country strong, they said. And you could see it when they showed the match and stuff like that. So DDP heard that Rodman was coming back to WCW in 1998. So he called up Malone and asked him about coming in. And he was all in on it. He was like, wow, that'd be awesome. He said, what would you think of a tag team match with yourself and myself versus Hogan and Dennis Rodman? He's like, wow, that'd be awesome. So DDP pitched the idea to Eric Bischoff on like his deck or something like that. And Rodman and Malone were already kind of going at each other in the playoffs. They were bumping each other and like elbowing each other. They were already kind of aggressive. I think this was before the plan for the match came to be. I think they were already kind of teasing tension anyway. So it was like, art imitating life. It was really, really cool to kind of see those two worlds come together and just kind of a seamless transition here, because this was around the time the playoffs were going on, like I just said, and that they were going to be on opposite sides, opposite teams in the NBA Finals. So on June 3rd, 98, the Bulls played the Utah Jazz. The Chicago Bulls played the Utah Jazz on June 3rd, 1998, for the second year in a row were Rodman and Malone on opposite teams in the NBA Finals. How often does that happen? So it was right after that game, after the Bulls' Game 3 win over the Jazz, and Rodman picked up the victory in that game. I say pick up the victory like it's a fucking wrestling match. But no, the Bulls beat the Jazz in Game 3. Rodman obviously riding off this victory. He created this media firestorm, we're told, in WCW by jumping back into WCW, and we're shown footage of Rodman and Hogan teaming up against DDP. DDP was cutting a promo on the stage. Rodman and Hogan come out of nowhere and just lay him out. And they talked about how Rodman would actually skip Bulls practice to make a Nitro. And the coach was pissed. Phil Jackson, the coach, was calling Hulk Hogan, asking him where Rodman was. And Dennis denies this. Not that he wasn't there for practice. He kind of downplays that. But he does say, listen, if the coach said that I wasn't playing, that's a lie, because I was always there to play. He may skip practice. And he did the exact same thing with wrestling, too. He would always skip, like, training and stuff like that, but he was always there for the important stuff. He would skip the practice, didn't really felt like he needed it, but he was always there for the big games. He was always there for the big moments and matches in wrestling. And it kind of paid off, too, because the guy would go in there and pull it off. Shockingly, he would shock the world and do this whole thing where he didn't train, he didn't really practice, and he would still be awesome. He was just one of those people that kind of had it come easy to him. But anyway, so Bischoff kind of knew that he couldn't ask them to do anything on the court to promote the match for WCW, but wink, wink, he says, he kind of got in someone's ear to convince them to kind of tease tension, to plant the seeds for that future tag team match at Bash at the Beach, 1998. And Malone, I guess, always wanted to be a wrestler, DDP said. He didn't grow up wanting to be a basketball player. He grew up wanting to be a professional wrestler, and you can kind of tell based off his physique that that's accurate. So the Bulls ended up beating Jazz in the finals, and now it was time to start promoting the match for Bash at the Beach. And I guess regardless of the result of that final game between the Bulls and the Jazz, that Rodman was always going to be on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. Win or lose. I don't know if this was before or after Jay Leno was a part of WCW. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know about the timeline there. I think it was before, but I'm not entirely positive about that. But that's besides the point. So DDP knew that Rodman was always going to be on The Tonight Show. He thought that would be the perfect opportunity to start promoting said match. So Rodman was already supposed to be there. Hulk Hogan shows up, and they start talking about Malone and start talking shit about him. DDP and Malone show up, and with chairs, and they throw him down. This big brawl ensues, and Jay Leno gets caught in the midst of it, and he gets kind of chucked to the side. It's a great visual, and it kind of got real quick. Drew Carey was there. He even asked Hogan, like, oh, was that real? Or not Hogan, but DDP. He asked him if it was that real, like it looked real, blah, blah, blah. It was crazy. And the very next day, they held a press conference, and big things, DDP says, always happen at the press conferences. And that was where they confirmed that it would be Hogan and Rodman versus Malone and DDP at the 98 Bash at the Beach pay-per-view. So Malone actually trained with DDP at the power plant for weeks. He was really, intense about it. Rodman didn't really have that same intensity that Malone did. He wasn't really as passionate about it, didn't really care as much. Malone was ready, he trained, he was in great physical condition. He had a great physique. The guy looked like $1 million. Regardless of Rodman not really training as much as Malone, Hogan felt that both guys had it, and that was enough to carry the buzz of the match and stuff like that. Rodman, in typical Rodman fashion, was at the bar the night before, so we went out there the next day for Bash at the Beach, completely out of it, and you can kind of tell just by looking at the guy, and he said he felt like hell for that first 15 minutes, but once he got hit, he was completely into it, he was good to go. So I guess Hogan said that he was supposed to rip off Rodman's shirt, because I guess Malone took off his shirt ready for the match. Dennis Rodman was supposed to take his shirt off as well, but I guess Hogan tells the story as, I was supposed to do it, Rodman didn't want me to take off his shirt, because he was embarrassed of his physique. Because Malone looked like $1 million. Rodman did not. I mean, the guy was at the fucking bar the night before, so I can't say I'm surprised. So Rodman tells this story as, I wanted to keep my shirt on because it was a cool shirt and whatever. So obviously that's bullshit. Hogan thought he was intimidated. It's kind of easy to tell that was indeed the case. Hogan bullshits a lot of stuff, but I can kind of tell that was probably the truth. But anyway, so they talk about it. The first lockup in the moment was a huge moment. In the match, rather. The first lockup was a huge moment. The crowd went crazy. Despite the fact that these guys had minimal wrestling experience, they went in there and fucking proved that they could go in there and hold their own. So Rodman at one point in the match spit in DDP's face. And he confirmed here on this special that was not talked about. That was not supposed to happen. DDP retaliated by spitting back at Rodman. And things got real there for a couple of moments. And they started hitting each other for real. And those bumps were real and stuff like that. Maybe he's kayfabing, but I tend to take him at his word here that it was indeed what happened. He said that, hey, listen, if I dropped and got a chair, things would have gotten real ugly real quick. So things got real tense there between Rodman and DDP for a couple minutes of that match. So DDP says they don't praise the match as being this instant classic, this 5-star classic. He does say that they went in there and hit all their key spots. They did all the moments that they should have. I mean, it wasn't the most amazing match in the world, but it was a case where they went in there, did what they were supposed to do, and it paid off because the crowd ate it up, and that was all they really needed to do. So going on from there, Hogan talks about how he had never been slammed like that before, not even by Andre, by Karl Malone. That's how strong the guy was. Rodman also said that after he did the bumps and he took it got kind of real there for a few moments between himself and Malone. After he took that final diamond cutter from Malone, he was just happy that it was over. I mean, he had fun. He was happy he got the chance to go in there and wrestle Malone, but he was happy that he didn't have to take those bumps anymore. And Rodman actually says he wished that they could have gone in there and done more, whether it be a singles match or work with Randy Savage. He wishes they could have done a lot more with that than they did. Bischoff says that type of situation may never happen again. It's one of those things in his career, maybe not the most proud of one of those things that he's most proud of, but it's definitely among those things. It may not be. What I meant to say was that it wasn't the thing that he is definitely number one most proud of, but it might be among those things. So anyway, Bischoff said that, Malone, Rodman, at the peak of their careers, popularity-wise, physically, everything else, they were at the peak of their professional careers. And then you had a Hulk Hogan, one of the biggest stars of all time, not even just then, one of the most recognizable names in pro wrestling history ever, not just back then. That type of, storm, that perfect storm may never happen again. That's like bringing in, I don't know. I'm not entirely huge on sports, so I can't say. But I know they have Gronk now, and Tom Brady's kind of getting up there in age. But, people like that, bringing them in with John Cena and doing something like that with Cena and fucking, I don't know, The Rock or something like that, But anyway, Hogan said that he was happy that they could pull it off, and DDP says to close this thing out that Malone belongs in the celebrity wing of the Hall of Fame. Yeah, Malone and Rodman both, I would say. And I know it wasn't that long of a run. It only lasted about a few months in the summer of 98, but it was such a big impact for WCW. Maybe not necessarily for WWE, but how often do we see people that accomplished absolutely nothing in WWE get inducted into the Hall of Fame? Drew Carey was in one fucking Rumble match for 10 seconds in 2001. Maybe a little longer than that, but you get my gist. It was a little, it's a little silly to induct him, but not, Karl Malone or Dennis Rodman. So I got to agree with DDP here that I think both guys, not just Malone, belong in the celebrity wing of the Hall of Fame at some point. I know it happened in WCW, not WWE, so they may not feel inclined to do that, but whatever. But I completely agree, and again, I'm very happy they included DDP on this. It would have been very petty of them to either edit out his parts or to not film it with him and whatever, just because he's not, I don't know if he signed to AEW, I don't think so. He just is very close with Cody. He's made a number of appearances there. He wrestled on one of their fucking shows a couple months ago, actually at Bash of the Beach, ironically enough, at their Bash of the Beach show on a Wednesday in mid-January earlier this year, on an episode of Dynamite. But I thought this was great. Bottom line, I thought this was a very good special. Kind of focusing on one of those stories that you don't hear a lot about. If you lived through it, if you watched it at the time, obviously you know all about it. I wasn't there. I was only 2 years old when this happened, 3 years old. I was born in 95. I'm not overly familiar with the whole Dennis Rodman, Karl Malone thing. I mean, I've read about it, I've heard about it, but I've never really seen, I don't think I've ever seen the full match before. I know that may surprise a lot of people, but I've never seen the full match before. I saw highlights of it here. I'll probably have to go back and watch the whole thing at this point. But I thought this was great. Shined a lot of light on something that doesn't really get talked about over 20 years later and how big of an impact it was for WCW. So definitely check it out right now on the WWE Network, available at this very moment. WWE Untold, Rodzilla Runs Wild. So on that note, guys, I should be back tomorrow with a new Dark Side of the Ring review. We discussed the Montreal Screwjob episode on Friday. I'm going to go back and review all the episodes from Season 1 before I talk about Season 2 with Benoit. I saw Part 1 on Friday. It was fucking phenomenal. So I'm looking forward to watching the rest of it on Tuesday on Vice. Until then, guys, be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content. And yeah, that's about it. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, folks, /week if you're listening to this on Monday by any chance. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.